I want to talk about the ongoing WGA and SAG-AFTRA union strikes and why, due to the business of streaming, the studios are in trouble. So why are the actors and writers striking? This is a recurring issue that comes up whenever there's a major technological shift in the way people consume entertainment. In 1960, it was due to the rise of television. The union's arguments to the studios at that time was, if you start replaying our old movies on television, you are taking audience attention away from our current and future projects. You are effectively making us compete against ourselves. We need to be compensated for any lost opportunity. The remedy to that conflict was residual payments. Ever since the 1960 strike, studios have had to pay writers and actors whenever one of their old projects was broadcast on television. The next time both unions struck was the actors in 1980 and the writers in 1981. This time it was about the rise of VHS and home video sales, as well as the newly invented cable subscription model. Actors and writers were again competing against themselves for audience attention, so they struck and got residuals for home video sales and cable TV. And now this current strike is about the rise of streaming services. Every time one of these new technological paradigms emerges, it is not included in any existing contracts and is therefore exempt from the residual obligations. According to some striking union members, this is why the entire HBO brand is now buried in a terrible new app and service called Max. By doing away with HBO branding entirely, Warner Bros. Discovery was able to get out of any legacy obligations tied to the HBO brand. It's incredibly shady, but pragmatically, it might have been necessary because the TLDR here is that there are far too many streaming services, and several of them are going to die. Except for Netflix, every major streaming service lost billions of dollars in 2022. So what happened? Some of these services have actually existed for quite a while and were doing well. For instance, Paramount Plus started as CBS All Access way back in 2014. Viacom, who owned CBS, also owned Showtime, MTV, Nickelodeon, BET, and Comedy Central, each of which had its own streaming app, and most of those were free and supported with ads. The reason these apps worked financially was because Viacom's primary business at that time was what's called linear TV. It's called linear TV because it's a bunch of channels that are each a constant, unbroken stream of programming. You can choose which channel to watch, but you can't decide what's on that channel. If you don't like the show that's on right now, you have to wait for another one. So the first crop of these studio-owned streaming apps were really just supplemental adjuncts to the real business, which was still linear TV. But linear TV is dying. So as the death of linear TV looms ever nearer, all the studios decided to get into streaming as quickly as possible. To boost subscriber numbers, CBS All Access started developing shows that would only be available on their streaming service. The first show from Viacom CBS that was available only on streaming was Star Trek Discovery. It was a big hit and it gave the streaming platform a massive boost in new subscribers. And they have continued that growth every year, boosted by more and more original streaming-only programming. And they have since folded their other linear TV properties like MTV and Comedy Central into a single all-inclusive service called Paramount Plus. Yet even with the addition of wildly popular shows like Yellowstone and its various streaming-only spin-offs, they are still losing a ton of money. In 2022, they lost over $1 billion. Peacock, owned by Comcast, Paramount Plus, owned by Paramount Global, formerly Viacom, and HBO, HBO Max, and Discovery Plus, owned by Warner Bros. Discovery, each lost over $1 billion, even before factoring in things like accrued interest on debt and asset depreciation and amortization. And Disney Plus did even worse, even though they are by far the biggest by revenue, and the only one of these corporations that turned a profit in 2022. These studios know that their linear TV businesses are dying and that streaming is their only hope. But streaming comes with its own costs. The traditional model for the studios has been to produce the content, which requires a huge upfront investment, and then to sell that content through various distribution channels to recoup that cost and eventually turn a profit. So they pay millions upfront to make a movie, then they sell that movie to first-run theaters, then they sell it to budget theaters, then they sell it to airlines and hotels, then they sell it to cable via pay-per-view and video on demand, then they sell directly to customers via VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, or the iTunes Store, etc. Then they sell to premium cable channels like HBO, and finally, when every other avenue is exhausted, they sell it to cable and broadcast television. That is 7 distinct opportunities to sell one piece of content. And an 8th opportunity arose in 2007 when Netflix started licensing tons of content from these studios for their new streaming service. So that's 8 opportunities to sell one movie. The trouble with putting content directly onto your own streaming service is that those 8 opportunities to sell collapse into only one. You have one opportunity to recoup all your costs and eke out a profit. And it comes with risks that didn't exist before, like maintaining the technological infrastructure, which you didn't have before. You're also now selling direct to consumer, which introduces enormous customer acquisition and retention costs, which you didn't have before. These added costs, combined with reducing 8 sales channels down to 1, lead to a need for drastic cost cutting on the production side. None of these CEOs wants to be the idiot that puts a major media corporation out of business. And from their point of view, salaries and residuals are part of those upfront production costs that need to be cut. So they are resorting to some very unscrupulous populist tactics to try to withhold every single possible penny they can, even going so far as threatening to use AI technology to obviate the striking unions entirely. Why pay a human for an excellent product when you can get a truly mediocre product for free? Most people, when talking about these strikes, including SAG president Fran Drescher, bring up the enormous compensation packages of these studio CEOs. And yes, I agree wholeheartedly that corporate CEOs are paid far too much, especially as a ratio to the lowest wage workers in their companies. But in the context of these strikes, CEO compensation is kind of a non-issue. Reducing or even eliminating executive compensation will not even make a dent in the struggles of the working people of Hollywood. I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations to illustrate this point. SAG says they have 160,000 members on strike, and the WGA says they have 11,500 members on strike. If we took the entire annual compensation packages from the Netflix co-CEOs Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos, Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, Paramount CEO Bob Bakish, Comcast CEO Brian Roberts, and Disney CEO Bob Iger, added them together and gave all that money to the unions, that would only amount to $1,342.86 per union member. And nobody can live on an extra $1,300 a year in residuals. So CEO compensation, while obviously disgusting, is not really a useful target for the striking unions. What the unions are actually asking for is just 2% of the streaming revenue generated by their work. So I did that calculation as well, not including Disney revenue in this because they have theme parks and cruises and merchandising and licensing revenue. I'm also not including the real elephants in the room, Apple and Amazon, because they don't reveal revenue numbers for their streaming services. And again, this is revenue, not profit. NBC Universal made $39.2 billion in 2022, Warner Brothers Discovery made $33.8 billion, Netflix made $31.62 billion, and Paramount made $30.15 billion. If we add all that revenue together and take 2%, which is all the unions are asking for, we get nearly $2.7 billion. That is almost $16,000 per union member. And when you add in Disney, Apple, and Amazon streaming revenues, it would mean a real livable wage for the vast majority of these striking union members.
That is just not realistic.
I can actually understand why he and the other studio executives might genuinely feel that way. They're feeling the pressure of the simultaneous death of their linear TV business and the seemingly dead on arrival streaming business. Asking them to give up 2% of their revenue when they're already losing billions of dollars a year probably doesn't seem realistic to them. So what can they do? Well, they should shut down their streaming services and find other channels for distribution. But what does that look like? Well, remember this graph from earlier showing how badly these services were losing money? I intentionally hid part of that graph, which may contain at least a partial solution for the failing streamers. Check out Netflix. While every other streamer is losing at least $1 billion a year, Netflix is not only profitable, it is very profitable. Netflix got their start by licensing content from the big networks, and they can afford to do that again, especially for old shows that have already ended and that people love to binge on repeat. Peacock should give Netflix an exclusive license to stream shows like Seinfeld, The Office, Friends, Parks and Rec. Because these older shows from the linear TV era are some of the biggest perennial hits in the age of streaming, they should charge a boatload for them. And while I think Netflix is the obvious place for these older shows, Paramount is never going to release the new seasons of Star Trek onto Netflix. So what should those companies do? Who can they partner with? Is it Apple? No. Is it Amazon? Maybe. That could work. But who I think these failing streaming services should strike a deal with is YouTube. YouTube has by far the most stable and robust video streaming infrastructure in the world. They stream more video content than any other company. Collectively, we watch over 1 billion hours of YouTube every single day. And they manage to make a profit while doing it. And YouTube's entire operation is based on streaming content owned by others. I think they would be more than happy to share that brand space with companies like Peacock and Paramount+. So imagine if Peacock, instead of building and maintaining their own streaming service, leasing space in data centers all around the world, what if they instead put their new original content on a new type of unique premium non-pareil YouTube channel? That way all the real mechanical costs of actually streaming your streaming service would fall onto YouTube, and the studios could monetize their content in a more predictable, stable way. I don't know exactly how it would work, but I do think it could work. Obviously, regardless of what happens, Apple TV Plus and Amazon Prime Video will probably be around for a very long time. Neither of those services needs to make money. They're both ancillary to other businesses. Apple sells iPhones, and their streaming service is a value add to that, while Amazon sells everything else, and their streaming service is a value add to that. I think Disney Plus will be fine. They have Marvel and Star Wars and Pixar and ESPN, and now they also have Hulu. And of the streamers I've talked about in this video, they are the only one that the company as a whole is very profitable. They can afford to lose some money while turning their streaming business business around. Paramount and Peacock can't afford that. Warner Brothers Discovery might be fine, mostly on the lingering reputational strength of HBO, but Paramount Plus, Peacock, and smaller services like Starz, MGM Plus, and AMC Plus are in mortal danger. And regardless of whether it is actually a nail in the coffin of these bad businesses, they absolutely should acquiesce to the demands of the unions and give up 2% of their streaming revenue. If you can't pay your workers a decent wage and still make a profit, you shouldn't be in business.